Welcome to Impact Under the Big Sky, Stories of Philanthropy in Montana. This podcast is brought to you by the Montana Community Foundation, where our mission is to cultivate a culture of giving so Montana communities can flourish. Join us as we share inspiring stories of generosity, innovation, and impact from across the Treasure State. From rural towns to bustling cities, we'll explore how philanthropy is shaping Montana's future. One gift, one grant, and one story at a time.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today, we are here to recognize International Women's Day, which is a global movement to celebrate the achievements of women and girls while also calling for action to advance gender equity. This year's theme is Accelerate Action, reminding us of the urgency to protect and expand access to women's health care. I'm Kylie Gursky. I'm the director of the Women's Foundation of Montana, which is an impact program of the Montana Community Foundation. We started in 1999, and together with our donors, we work to improve the lives of women and girls in Montana. We've granted since 1999 about $2 million out to organizations, again, working to improve the lives of women and girls in Montana. And in 2024 alone, we awarded almost $400,000. In this episode, we are joined by Stephanie McDowell of Bridgercare, which administers Montana's Title X network, Montana Family Planning, Martha Fuller of Planned Parenthood, Stephanie Morton of Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies. These three leaders are at the forefront of advancing health equity in Montana. Together, in our conversation, we're going to explore the work being done to improve maternal health outcomes, protect and expand reproductive and gender-affirming care, and existing threats to women's health. Let's start just with some introductions. If you could tell us a little bit about yourselves, your organizations, and your roles. We'll start there.
Yeah, I'm happy to go. So as you said, I'm Martha Fuller. I'm president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Montana. It's one of my two jobs because I'm also the CEO of Planned Parenthood of Montana. So I wear two separate hats. But Planned Parenthood Advocates of Montana is the political and advocacy arm of Planned Parenthood in Montana. We have some overlapping board members, but our work is really focused on advocacy, including lobbying, electoral work, education around issues, as opposed to the C3 focus of Planned Parenthood of Montana, which is healthcare. And I have been in this role for 11 and a half years. It is always interesting, continues to be interesting, as I'm sure we'll talk about today. But it's really my pleasure and privilege to be able to serve the women of Montana in this way.
Hey, everybody. My name is Stephanie Morton, and I serve as the Executive Director of Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies. HMHB is a statewide nonprofit that has been around since about 1984, and we work to improve the health and well-being of moms, babies, and families across the state in a variety of different ways. A lot of that has to do with reaching into local level communities, providing resources and assistance in convening and accessing resources that are available at the state and national levels, as well as through a variety of different tools that providers of all sorts working with families can use in the state.
Thanks, Stephanie. Stephanie McDowell, do you want to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your organization and your role?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie McDowell. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the executive director at Bridgercare and Montana Family Planning. And Bridgercare has been Bozeman's local sliding fee scale sexual and reproductive health clinic for over 50 years. And we provide care to around 6,000 patients per year. And we provide care regardless of ability to pay, regardless of folks' insurance or Medicaid status. And then in 2022, we successfully competed the state of Montana for what's called the Title X grant. It's a federal grant. After we saw some pretty harmful legislation that would have really limited or restricted the information we could give to patients and the freedom that our patients have to make decisions. And so now we also fund and support a network of 20 clinics across the state And that includes our amazing partners at Planned Parenthood of Montana. We're so grateful for them. So those 20 clinics provide sliding fee scale and sexual and reproductive health care through our program called Montana Family Planning. So you can look up where to find care at montanafamilyplanning.org. But the majority of our clinics are in rural and frontier areas where folks just have little or no access to sexual and reproductive health care. And then lastly, we also do some education because we know that education unlocks our true potentials. So our education team works to provide information about reproductive health, healthy relationships, consent, how to be an ally, things that are especially important right now. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm just so grateful that all three of you are here to speak to this today, to speak specifically to the International Women's Day theme, which is accelerate action. It's really meant to draw our attention to the importance of taking swift and decisive steps for women's equity. And I'm curious to each of you, what accelerate action means to you in terms of your work, and what that looks like. So Martha, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. You know, that theme of accelerated action, as I was reading about it this morning, was really powerful to me because we have seen what happens when we don't accelerate action and we actually fall behind. Since the Dobbs decision and various states banning abortion and restricting access to gender-affirming care, we are already seeing the impacts of when we don't move forward quickly. We fall behind much faster than I think anybody could have imagined. I think about things like, for example, the maternal mortality rate in the state of Texas just grew astronomically after the Dobbs decision. So you'll find out. I use a lot of sports metaphors, and I don't actually understand sports. But when I think about accelerating action, I really think about like the full court press. Here we go. Because we have to do multiple things all at the same time in order to move forward and advance women's health equity and access to sexual and reproductive health care, right? We have to expand access. We have to enact good policy. We have to make sure that research is happening related to women's health care. We have to make sure that we're advocating, that people are being educated. So there's all of this work that happens sort of in concert with one another. And sometimes it feels like we're in a moment where we can't do something, right? Like we can't influence policy. But continuing to move forward in any way that we possibly can, for me, is the way that we can make that rapid and decisive change.
Jump in as well. I really appreciated that kind of the partner perspective that you talked about a little bit, Martha. The idea of, we really do need to have that full court press and all of the multitudes of different strategies and fronts and then partners that represent our collective efforts in advancing women's health. Specific to healthy mothers, healthy babies, we really try and create work and do work that is always relational. So how is this, looking at it? And while our niche is really looking at that pregnancy through age 3 and what we would call maybe the expanded perinatal period, we know that women's health over the lifespan deeply impacts any and all of those outcomes, right? And vice versa. While we might be looking at a really specific area that has a pretty steep learning curve and lots of changes, and it's really delicate in a lot of ways. It does reverberate over the lifespan of that mom and family and also baby. So when I'm thinking about accelerating action, I'm really thinking about how we strike that balance between long-term systemic changes and then also meeting the needs of now. The resounding voices of people who are saying they don't have access to childcare. Accessing insurance or medical care is difficult. When they do have access, they feel that the information provided to them, they don't have confidence in it. It's just all of these. And I think it's also important to put in this, the things that don't get said, the things that aren't told, and the amount of dis, and lack of information in women's health. And the perinatal period really does add like a very like microscopic and intense period of time where, that's when women are accessing the most healthcare, right? Like some of these pregnancies are really an incredible amount of care in that, pregnancy and then the postpartum phase. And when we're thinking about that, increase into care, it's also what are the opportunities that we have there in order to get somebody, situated with long-term access and connection to primary care and, having some more continuity and building relationship with providers where possible and sustaining that through insurance. So that balance between those long-term systemic and the things that we need to do now. Because people are having babies.
Yeah, I really appreciate both of your perspectives. I have a lot of respect for both of you and the work that you're doing. I'm not going to speak to like very specific things happening in the news because I can't even track what's happening and like what's going on. And I feel like if I say something, it will be outdated in like an hour. So I'm going to speak more to like what we've been trying to do at Bridgercare as an organization. And that is like really zooming out and asking us to lean into nurturing one another and our workspaces and the people in our lives, the people that we trust, because we make better decisions when we have trust and we create psychological safety. And when we have that trust, we can be brave together. And I want to be clear, we also talk a lot about at Bridgercare about the difference between safety and comfort and being brave, because to be brave, you need to be a little uncomfortable. And like, is my safety at the consequence of someone else's safety? And so just engaging in these conversations, because what I do see is that we are like all very nuanced human beings and have lots of different needs. And what works for me may not work for someone else. But what we do consistently need is connection and trust with one another. And I just see that our ability to engage in healthy conflict and repair and restorative justice, these are often the things that I'm seeing are breaking our collaboration and leading us to burnout. And so how do we, skiers always say this, but I've adopted it for us as well. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Like, how do we slow down to listen to one another, to trust and build relationship? When we do that, we can move quickly because we trust each other to be in it together and trust one another to be brave together. And so I know I'm zooming way out, but that's what we've really been focusing on.
Thank you all. I just echo Stephanie's appreciation of your perspectives. And I like that little flipping accelerate action on its head a little bit. Stephanie was saying we've got to focus on slowing down in our relationships with each other. And I think that's so necessary just because of the level of expertise in so many areas of work that you each must have to be able to move forward is it's overwhelming. And we've only been talking for 15 minutes about the work. I'm curious if each of you could share some insight into your area of work about the current landscape for the people that you're serving. What are the biggest challenges for healthcare rights and access for Montana's communities right now? How are you working to address those challenges? And Stephanie McDowell, I'll throw it back to you. I know you didn't want to speak too much to what's happening in the news, so I won't push you to do that. But sort of bigger picture, what are the challenges you're seeing right now?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm happy to get in there and talk about what's going on too. So the day after the election, we had 20 patients call our Bridgercare office and schedule appointments for IUDs, which is a highly effective form of birth control that lasts between 5 to 12 years. I would say normally we have like 4 patients per day scheduling an IUD, but on November 6th, we had 20 people call, including one mom who scheduled 2 appointments for her 2 teenage daughters. So people are really scared, and justifiably so. Like you may have heard about the court ruling in Texas that restricts how teens can access birth control. And so today, Teens in Texas have less access to contraception than they had to abortion 2 years ago, which is very alarming. And I'm going to repeat that because it's so alarming. Teens in Texas have less access to birth control today than they had to abortion 2 years ago. So erosion of rights is the chipping away. I think this like big scary, there's going to be a ban, there's going to be, these things are happening and there's chipping away at rights happening today currently. The other thing that you may have heard about are conservative lawmakers are pushing to redefine pregnancy at fertilization versus implantation, which would make birth control like IUDs or some emergency contraception classified as abortifacients because they can prevent implantation. And so if these forms of birth control are considered abortion, they would be subject to all the same restrictions as abortion. So that means if you live in the wrong state, you can no longer have access to emergency contraception or IUDs because they're now illegal. So again, like these things are slowly happening and it's really easy to get caught up in this story. Like there's going to be a big ban or they're slowly chipping away at rights. And again, I go back to November 6th, we had 20 patients call and that it didn't stop there. Like people are really, really scared. And I think, again, that's where we go back to like, how do we build trust here? Because our providers have to go into that room and be there for that patient and be present. And to do so, they need to feel psychologically safe in their workspace too. So creating that trust together isn't just about the provider-patient relationship. It's about leadership. It's about how we show up with one another. So yeah, I'm more than happy to get into the logistics a little bit if you need me to.
I'm thinking about this sort of from two perspectives, right? So Planned Parenthood Advocates of Montana works to advocate for access to sexual and reproductive health. And I always think about the work that we do as advocating for the patients, right? For the people who come to places like Planned Parenthood of Montana for care or Bridgercare or the other Title X providers. And those folks, people seeking sexual and reproductive health care, have all of the challenges that every single one of us living in Montana has accessing healthcare, right? Like we have geographical challenges, we have weather challenges, we have huge swaths of the state without providers. We have to make sure we can afford the care. I know a lot of folks are concerned about the future of their Medicaid. So those things face all of us when we're thinking about getting care. Even people who have insurance are thinking, gosh, have I met my deductible? What am I going to have to pay out of pocket? And folks who are seeking sexual and reproductive health care have a layer above that makes getting that care more difficult, or can, right? That includes things like getting childcare, because most of the people who are seeking abortion care already have children, getting time off from work. Planned Parenthood, like the other Title X providers in the state, serve primarily folks with lower incomes who tend not to necessarily have vacation time or sick time that they can use to get to an appointment. There's transportation issues. And then on top of all of that, there's a layer of stigma related to sexual and reproductive healthcare, whether that's gender affirming care or abortion or even birth control, depending on the communities and families that people are coming from. So, folks show up seeking care with all of that stuff, sort of in their bag with them when they walk into the healthcare provider. And so even without threats to access, even without things happening on the federal level, that is just sort of the day-to-day reality for people who need care. So when I think about the work that Planned Parenthood Advocates of Montana does as the advocacy side of this work, I really think about us being sort of laser focused in the same way I was saying, like to advance, accelerate action. We have to work on many different levels. Planned Parenthood Advocates of Montana really focuses in on that advocacy, particularly in the legislature, around ballot measures, et cetera, and connecting our more than 45,000 members across the state to their legislators, to decision makers, and finding ways to help them engage in the work and have their voices be heard. And that alone, right, is empowering. Feeling like you have a voice and can speak to your own experience is really, really important, particularly when there's all of these challenges that face you when you're just trying to get care. But, I think we think about the landscape as having changed dramatically in the last few months. But the reality is, for people who are trying to get birth control, trying to have an abortion, seeking gender affirming care, like, it is what it has been. It hasn't necessarily changed for better or for worse.
I think we come in, HMHB is a little distinct from the, we're not providing any direct services, right? And so I come at this from thinking about access and just the overall health of the women's health system. And then also about how we're connecting folks back to sources of care that are maybe outside of what we would all consider a traditional health system, and how important those community connections and providers are, right? Eliminating some of that transportation struggles, and then also thinking about how we trust the people around us more often than we don't, those trusted messengers. And so to kind of build off what Stephanie and Martha said is, we have these policy shifts. You're looking to other states and you're just seeing the erosion and the departure of a lot of providers who, maybe are leaving because they're folks that provide abortion care or gender affirming care. But they're also, folks who are providing other types of care. And so as folks are moving from policies that are making them feel less confident in their ability to do their job without, having serious legal consequences, this is trickling down across the entire system of care. And that's particularly true here in Montana, where a lot of there are not a ton of providers who are really niche, right? We're looking at our rural landscapes, and these folks are providing a lot more generalized care and are working with, people within that community as well. And so that's a real concern for us. We also work a lot on perinatal mental health, and specifically thinking about what are those, what's that access to mental health providers. I would totally agree, Martha. I don't feel like the landscape has changed dramatically over the last 4 months, because it's really difficult to get mental health care in most parts of the state of Montana for most people. That's a reality and has been for a while. Like that mental health care shortage provider areas, I think that's 45 out of the 56 counties. And it just is really getting people, one, to have access to any kind of mental health care, and then two, to have access to appropriate health care, right? So is somebody trained in this specific area of concern? Are they able to address, or detect or, really suss out some of those more nuanced pieces of the puzzle that really coming out, for all members of the family during that, initial transition time and pregnancy, really thinking about how when we have these overall stresses on our healthcare system and providers are moving, that affects entire agencies, that affects the entire system. And someone mentioned, Medicaid and all this, right? Like it's that same kind of erosion of the basis of how people are receiving care and who they're receiving it from. So that's a grave concern for us. Alongside of that, you're looking at a lot of, I would say, care coordination that is addressing those social determinants of health and helping people get to care or be able to pay for it, or also just, help with behavior changes or life changes, whatever is kind of necessary in those spaces. A lot of that is, kind of adjacent to medical care in the best case scenario, right? Like you have an integrated care coordinator right there to be able to help. But in other times that's based within the community. And so we're looking to see what are those other family supporting agencies, whether that's a public health department, a Head Start, an HRDC, any number of different of those community-based organizations that they still have funding and are in existing and are in contact with those mental and medical health care providers. Like so crucial. They know when that shifts within their community that takes a little bit more time to get, to gain trust again with a new provider in that community. And they can be incredibly helpful in transferring that trust from maybe somebody who's a little bit worried about taking a referral for some sort of care, for whether that's legal or stigma, whatever sort of reason they might have, but getting them into those spaces where they can get care as well, right? So from our end, really like that outside kind of community-based perspective, these things are concerning and eroding, even if they're not necessarily, like direct policies that are like prohibiting, perinatal mental health care, right? So thinking about some of those pieces of it just more broadly, and just how shaky it feels.
Thank you all for taking a moment to focus on some of the challenges of the landscape that you're working in, that women are facing when they are trying to access basic healthcare. I had wanted to ask you about a little bit with the whirlwind of changes that are happening at the federal level, and also some of the attempts at the state level to shift the conversation and the tone around women's right to access healthcare. I wonder, and I'll ask sort of what you're monitoring in terms of that, and how you're thinking about it. But also, I know that each of you are, you've talked about how you move forward amidst sort of this chaos in positive ways to try to create something that is helpful to the communities that you're serving. So I don't necessarily just want to keep harping on a lot of the chaos and negativity that's happening around this issue. But if there are things that you are monitoring that you want to speak to, or if there are positive things that you are trying to push forward and you want to speak to that too, I'd be really interested in hearing if there are specific things that you each are working on that you'd like to share with our listeners.
Yeah, I really appreciate the word whirlwind. That is a very apt way to describe what's happening. But I also appreciate you opening the door to some like positive strategies that we're using. We always say like we make decisions based on data. And so right now, like watching what's happening at the federal and state level, it's like tracking what do we understand, what has been precedent, like what is likely to be the outcome of that, and really staying grounded in our experience and the knowledge that we have after so many years of providing this care. And I think for me, that feels like just not lighting your hair on fire and running in circles, like just still staying grounded in that we are professionals and we are experts in this area and we can track this. I will also say for our staff particularly and for our board, a lot of that looks like just educating them about even the structures of the government and how these decisions are being made. Like we have a committee, a reproductive justice committee, and they were like, are we going to have to stop doing this work? Like, are we going to have to take all the DEI stuff off of our website? And I had to explain like what the jurisdiction of an executive order is. And an executive order has authority over how the administrative branch of the federal government is run. And we are a private nonprofit. And no, we do not have to take DEI stuff off of our website. And that we will fund that with like beautiful donations from foundations like the Women's Foundation of Montana and from our donors, and that there is not jurisdiction of an executive order over that funding. And for people to hear, like there are some guardrails around the power. And I know we're in really dark times and it's really easy to get seduced by the shock and the awe, right? And to, again, light your hair on fire and run around, but bringing it back to what is the data? What do we know and understand? We have experience in this. We are standing on the shoulders of giants. Women have been doing this for millennia, and we will continue to do this. So staying grounded in that. And then I also just want to address, Kylie, your reflection on like, how do we communicate with our patients, with the community? And like, if you don't have the time with them to communicate all those things like we may with staff, for us, we always take it back to like, what are your rights? So after Roe fell, we put out a post that said, abortion is safe and legal in Montana. And so many people reached out to say thank you for like cutting through all the noise and giving us the information we needed to make whatever decision we had to in our life. Like right now, we're seeing a lot of really scary stuff happening around trans care at the state legislature. And we're putting out messaging like Bridgercare is still providing gender affirming care. Come on in. And just cutting through that for folks, because we do maybe understand the nuance, or we are able to look at that and say like, I don't know, like that might get enjoined in the courts, or what can we do about that? But for the person, the endpoint person that needs care or needs to make a decision, just really providing that accurate information in a clear way, without all the fear attached and without all the baggage attached.
I think I might be in a slightly darker place than Stephanie McDowell is. I've been thinking about what's been happening when you're talking about guardrails. I've been thinking about what's been happening as sort of like throwing spaghetti against the walls of democracy and of the Constitution, and what's constitutional, what's constitutionality. That to me is, it's not the individual executive orders. It's not the individual bills that are up in our legislature. It's not it's not the individual piece of information being taken off a government website, but it's this sort of like, we're going to try everything all at once, flood the zone. I think that's also a sports metaphor. And just wreak chaos and confusion, right? Like, we know that that's what this is about. And they're also trying to do the opposite of accelerating action. Like, let's go at it every single level that we can, right? Like, let's go after funding. Let's go after information. Let's go after providers. Let's go after patients. Let's make people afraid. And all of that is meant to cause chaos and instill fear, right? Make it so providers, as Stephanie Morton was talking about, will stop providing one kind of care, but then maybe we'll have to leave the state altogether. Like, I think about endocrinologists, people who often do gender affirming care for folks. Well, they're also treating people with diabetes, right? Like, we can't have a state where people don't want to practice medicine. But that's the aim of some of these bills in the legislature. We don't want people to stop voting, right? But we know that there are attempts to curtail our access to democracy. We don't want people to lose faith in the court system and in the three branches of government, but that's being attacked as well. Patients, we talked about things not necessarily changing, but some things do change if you're in a state with an abortion ban, or like now seeing mass deportations. Like, patients will be afraid to seek care because they are afraid what might happen to them when they walk into that doctor's office. Like, am I going to get reported and deported? Are they going to help me if I'm having a miscarriage and they think I might have had an abortion? Parents can't help their kids access care. So all of that, they're doing the same full court press, flooding the zone. And I do totally agree, Stephanie, that like, we cannot live in that moment, right? We cannot live with our hair on fire every single day. You can go into that for a minute, but if you like, if we try to live there, we're just going to be paralyzed. So I think and what I talk to folks on my team about is, when we have victories to celebrate them. Like, when we have joy, to celebrate that joy. I think about what happened, again, day after election day, when there were so many things that folks were sad about, the communities we care about were sad about, but yet we also had an incredible victory of protecting abortion access in Montana. And we are allowed to be happy about that. Like, we are allowed to be in the joy of that, even as all of these other things are happening. Just in the same way that our patients feel joy in their lives around all kinds of things, even though it might be hard for them to access care. Like, it's not, we have to still be human and feel good. You can't always feel bad, right? You have to feel good, or we can't carry on, right? Something is really, it's a real thing. People are being burned out. So while I think it is pretty dark, I also want to think about like, where are all of those places that we can shine a candle for people, whether that's saying to people in testimony in front of a committee, like, hey, trans and non-binary kids who are watching this, we see you. Like, we know you're there. We see you and we love you. Like, even small things like that to me is like how we combat this. And like, we are not going to start taking everything that they're trying as like fact, right? If we did that, we would be doing the same thing they're doing, like stopping and starting and stopping and starting and stopping and starting based on what the court's saying. And so, until I know for sure and a court has said you can't do this or you can do this, like, I'm not changing. Like, we're going to just continue moving forward.
Thanks, Martha. Thanks, Stephanie. And I think, Martha, to sort of speak to the point that you just made about how the challenges in accessing care when there's these sort of multiple attacks on people's sense of safety. So even with the deportations and people's comfort and ability in accessing professional care, I know that there's lots of work being done to help build those networks and get that communication out and create those channels of safety so that people might be able to access basic things like food banks and some element of care and amidst all that fear. And that just makes me wonder how you all are seeing organizations collaborate and building community and supporting each other. And even outside of organizations, how are you seeing communities sort of respond in this moment? And Stephanie Morton, if you wouldn't mind speaking to that.
Yeah. This kind of builds a little bit off of, what both Martha and Stephanie were talking about in the last question. Having something to do. I am finding that there is a lot of that upheaval piece, but moving towards spaces of action or, I can't say it any better than having something to do about something, right? As opposed to just worry and learn and consume. And for me, when I'm like, the place where I'm seeing that most clearly is actually in like legislative engagement and watching folks like testify or, helping them to get to a place where they feel confident, providing public testimony or written testimony. I'm really seeing a lot more interest in that than what I would say I've seen in the last two sessions, which is wild, right? Like you're walking right into the fire. But it is very much like that action-oriented space that I would say we've got a couple of different coalitions that we talk about the legislature and engagement in those spaces. So an early childhood coalition, a home visiting coalition, and then we also work with the Montana Doula Collaborative. And like interest and engagement and, contacting legislators and wanting to know more, I feel like that is at, you always want to offer it, but you're never sure who will, take it up. But in comparison to the last two sessions, I feel like more people are interested in taking action. And that has been something I felt was maybe surprising for me. As far as like organizations and other folks that I'm, working with, our partner orgs, there is a level of like connecting, you okay? Okay, you're okay. You okay? And, speaking personally as like a person, leading an organization and, feeling responsible for the employment of, all my staff and, contractors and all the folks that we work on behalf of, it doesn't feel particularly easy. And sometimes being an executive director or leader can feel exceptionally lonely. This has felt so much less lonely. And I feel like there's a lot more really meaningful connection and outreach to one another that I've seen both from people who I would call partner organizations and then also my funder organizations as well. That, going back to what Stephanie McDowell said about, we got to slow down, we got to reconnect in that piece. I have felt that so much. And I think that that's also happening within our local level connections as well, being, steady in a lot of these things. But yeah, our engagement with legislative stuff, and particularly around doulas, which I can talk a little bit more about, that has been something that I feel like people have really dove into in a manner that I haven't necessarily seen before.
Thanks, Stephanie. That's encouraging to hear. And I know I attended a small portion of your perinatal mental health conference this last year, and know that you're just building a really beautiful space for people to support each other, and seeing that in action was really encouraging. And knowing that that's in place as our community sort of face the challenges that they're facing now is reassuring. Martha or Stephanie, I don't know if either of you want to speak to that question either before we move on, but if there's something that's on your mind that you want to share.
Well, I'll just say I really resonated with Stephanie Morton said about leaders being there for each other. I'll tell a story on Stephanie McDowell. We were at an event together, and I was like, "Are you going to be there? Because we need to hug each other, and have that moment." So it's really, really important. And we all need that. We need to feel connected to community. Otherwise, it's awfully lonely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad that you all are checking in with each other and supporting each other. I've felt that in my own networks as well. And it's just nice to have people to, just say, how are you doing? How are you holding up? What are you thinking as far as how to move forward and continue to be available for the people who really need us in this moment? How are you taking care of yourself so you can be available to those people and keep doing the important, critical work that you're doing? Martha, I wonder, I think one important part of taking care of each other is talking about successes and where we have seen progress. And I wonder if there's something that you would want to share with us where you've seen, some real progress happening.
Well, I'm going to state the obvious because it is the most obvious thing, which is the incredible showing of the voters of Montana to pass CI-128 in November. I think we always knew, I have always heard, and we've seen in the past that, people really in Montana think it's really important to make their own personal medical decisions. And the process, it's not just the passage, but the process of getting there, to me, was so illustrative of how true that is for people. And the celebration of the winning, of course, is amazing. But for me personally, the progress I saw doing, knocking on doors and talking to people about the issue was really heartwarming. Seems like too small of a word, but reassuring, right? That people get it. People understand that we're talking about healthcare. They put it together. People understand the connection between access to abortion and access to IVF and access to birth control and their ability to make their own decisions about their families. And but that evening, seeing the votes come in was just an incredible feeling of community, right? I felt in community with all of the people across Montana who voted yes. And I also thought it was a really great moment for people who sort of have always wanted to be a part of this movement to step in, people who have long been a part of the movement to welcome others in. Watching volunteers go out was really great. I had my number one volunteer, who's my 16-year-old son, who just thought it was the coolest thing to go out and talk to people about access to healthcare and sexual and reproductive health. And it's because he had such a positive experience doing it and people were so positive about it. So for me, there are lots of other small examples every single day, but for me, that's something I'm just going to hold on to that for a really, really long time. That as a state, we get it, we understand it, we care about each other, we want each other to have access. We want to make sure that we're making our own decisions and that's protected. Feels really good.
Thanks so much, Martha. And thank you for your work and congratulations on that success. And I know that there were petition signatures in every single county in Montana. So across the state, just being reassured that, yeah, there are folks in every corner of our state who really understand the need and what's at stake for people. So yeah, thank you. I wonder, looking forward and moving ahead, if you all want to share some exciting initiatives or things that you're excited about, that you've sort of got on the horizon. And Stephanie McDowell, do you want to share first?
Sure. I mean, it's hard to top the ballot initiative, Martha, but I will try. It's pretty amazing. So we also, in coming in on this election cycle and like how big everything was, I think what, Martha, you mentioned, celebrating the joys and the successes is really important. And so just reflecting back, like seeing that we don't have a supermajority in our legislature anymore, and seeing there's cooperation between moderate Republicans with Democrats to protect access to Medicaid. Like, we are seeing some successes. And so we continue to like shine some light on those in dark times. And so I really appreciated you lifting the ballot initiative. And as we do that in our work, we do this exercise called circle of control, circle of influence, and then out of your control. And so coming into this election and like what could be the potential threats, we said, let's really focus on our circle of control. Let's make sure that our services are really strong, our organization is really resilient, our staff are supported, our patients are supported, our communication is clear. And in doing so, we felt like we really came into this election cycle prepared for what could be happening out there, out of our control. And so we've been able to really expand our services. We increased our services for infertility, just recognizing that that's often a service that's a pay to play, and that people have a right to that care. And we also expand our services for menopause care. Again, just a care that isn't valued and isn't really researched the way other care is. And we felt like that was something that needed to have a light shed on it, and care needed to be valued. We started offering services for erectile dysfunction. Again, like you talked about, Martha, these taboos and like care that we aren't talking about very openly. And then in 2025, we're going to start offering vasectomy. So we've been able to really, like, within, again, our circle of control, what do we have control over? What can we do that feels good right now? We've been able to really do that. And then we've also been working on creating connection around the state, especially with rural folks, with those 20 clinics around the state that are serving rural folks who may have a totally different experience of reproductive and sexual health care than the folks here in Bozeman do, or in Billings. So we're doing a listening and learning tour in a partnership with the Montana Sexual and Reproductive Health Collective, where we'll be engaging in traveling around the state over the next year and understanding what does sexual and reproductive health care look like and mean across Montana. What do folks need across Montana? And answering questions and supporting one another, and just, again, going back to engaging in that relationship and that support and caring for one another. So lots of exciting, good things happening within our circle of control, and we just kind of like need to watch and learn what's happening outside of that. But yeah, thanks for asking.
I'll jump in for some exciting initiatives that we're working on. Similar to you all, Stephanie, we're thinking about how do we deepen what we have already in place. And so there's some investments being made to the structural enhancement of our online statewide resource guide that's really focusing on those services across the state that are looking at, pregnancy through age 3. It's called LIFTS, and you can find it at lifts.org. Additionally, we're looking at some continued growth and expansion within our Native American Initiatives program. That program has done a lot of work in terms of talking about cultural safety and how we're helping providers across the state become more culturally safe and aware providers, and really inviting the whole person into their care as much as they can when they're doing work with particularly our Indigenous populations. And I think the other biggest piece of this is related also within some of the NAI work is expanding supports and like workforce and training for doulas and Indigenous birth workers. So we're working closely with the Montana Doula Collaborative and then convening the Indigenous Birth Workers Network to really start to think about what does this workforce currently need in terms of technical assistance? What do they need in terms of, changing policies in order to, whether that's at the, agency, hospital level, all the way up to those state level policies. Our efforts right now are really focused in on a bill that creates both a definition for doulas in the state of Montana and then authorizes Medicaid to be able to pay for these services. And for folks that don't know, doulas are trained non-medical professionals who are stewarding families through pregnancy, the birth, and then into the postpartum period. And there are, we estimate, close to 100 different folks in the state that are providing doula care right now. And it's largely just, private pay, and that makes it very limited. But the real kicker with this is that we know integration of a community-based doula into a birth improves outcomes for moms and babies. We're reducing unnecessary cesarean sections. We're reducing, low birth weight or preterm birth. And we're overall increasing the confidence that family has in the care that they're receiving, right? So that kind of steward to really be able to move them through that incredible experience and provide necessary education and then also advocacy on behalf of them. This is critically important for women of color. In our state, we have, Indigenous women are overrepresented in maternal mortality, and this is also true within infant mortality as well. We need to really be thinking about what are some of those targeted strategies that we can use to reduce these inequities, and doula care is absolutely one of those. So regardless of the outcome, what happens in this legislative session, we will continue to work in advancing that workforce and hopefully getting more people paired up with doulas to be able to experience the benefits of that care.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. The Women's Foundation will be also tracking your success with the increasing access to doula care through the legislature and beyond this year. And I'm just so grateful to hear, really just scratching the surface for each of you about your expertise and your work. And I know there's just so much more that you're doing that we didn't even touch on in your just very complex and critical work. And I'm curious if you can share with listeners where they could find more information about each of your work if they are curious to learn more.
So for Planned Parenthood Advocates of Montana, the easiest place to go is ppamt.org. And folks, there's a couple of buttons there they can click. One is to take action, another is to sign up for updates. And, a lot of us don't go to websites anymore. So I always encourage folks to follow at PAdvocatesMT on all the social medias, except for X. We are no longer on X, but we're on Blue Sky and Instagram. And that's a great way to stay up to date about what's happening. It's we've seen people engaging, as we're talking about in the session, like 300 people signed up on a letter, like over the course of a weekend, around an anti-abortion bill that was being heard. So it's a great way to stay in touch and meet people where they are.
For Bridgercare, very similar to Planned Parenthood. Bridgercare.org has all of our resources, all of our links to our social media. Bridgercare is that website is primarily focusing on our clinic in Bozeman. And then we have another website called MontanaFamilyPlanning.org. And that's the website where you can find any of the 20 clinics across the state, including our 4 Planned Parenthoods. It talks about what your rights are, how you can access the care at any of those sites. So I encourage folks to visit that. And then Bridgercare is also a member, I briefly mentioned this before, of the Montana Sexual and Reproductive Health Collective. There is a website and social media, and there's a lot more information coming out of the collective on what's happening at the session and how to get engaged if you would like to in the listening and learning tour. So I agree with Martha. I'm going to direct you to websites, but you can also find any of those on social media if that's your platform of choice.
And I'll chime in and say same for HMHB. Our website is hmhb-mt.org. On there, you can find information about a lot of our different programs, link over to our online resource guide called Lifts. There's a space to sign up for a newsletter, and then also lots of different opportunities for downloading resources that you might be able to use in your practice if you're working with kids and families, and variety of ways to get in touch with us. We get lots of different outreach as individual staff members, and we're always happy to receive that. So please don't hesitate. For our socials at Instagram, our handle is HMHBMT. We're also on Facebook, and those are big places where you can keep up with what Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies is doing.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And I assume everybody can make a donation directly to your organizations on your website. So I'm seeing some nods and thumbs up on our videos, so that is great. And I would just encourage our listeners, if you've found that the conversation has been informative, inspiring, compelling, I would just urge you to go and make donations directly to each of these organizations for their very critical work that they are doing. And the Women's Foundation will enthusiastically continue to support you and be your advocates. And I just want to wrap up by asking each of you to share some of your reflections or thoughts on what brings you hope in this work. And we'll go out on that hopeful note. So Stephanie McDowell, do you want to share what brings you hope in this work?
I would love to. And even this conversation is making me hopeful, like hearing about the work that you all are doing and just reflecting so much on, in this work, the personal is professional and the professional is personal. Like even when Stephanie Morton's talking about doulas, I'm like, oh my gosh, my doula just made everything right. So I am leaving this conversation even with hope. I have this quote that I read a lot, and it's by Dr. King, and he says, "We cannot capitulate to finite disappointments. What we do is confront those finite disappointments with infinite hope." And so I try to remind myself of that. And remind myself, in this history of our struggles for justice and freedom, we've always faced these waves, and we have to continue to face the waves with hope. And I can't clutch my pearls in despair, and I can't turn away from this. I need to, again, stay strong, focus on what I know, focus on what feels right, focus on the community, even that we have right now here together, and just confront it with infinite hope. And I have to ask myself to do that if I want to see that happening in the people around me. And so I just continue to revisit that. And some days are easier than others.
It's this conversation, Kylie, I appreciate you convening us all to have a conversation like this. This is extremely helpful, to get out of maybe the task and do space, and to have a little bit of breath for reflection. in community. So I appreciate that piece. But for me, it is having very clear work that I can do something every single day with an incredible amount of time. Right? Like, it's not just, it is the thing that I do with most of my hours of the day, right? Is, dedicating it to work and having a position where, one, I feel like I'm, doing impactful work that's improving the lives of, moms, babies, and families in our state, but also, being able to work in partnership, whether that's with our staff or our board or our partners and funders or local level collaboratives and groups, to be able to, keep moving ahead in that hopeful manner. There's some days where it's just like enough to feel we get to do that. And that really does lift my spirits right now.
As the Stephanies have said, community is huge in giving me hope. And I'll just tell a really quick story from yesterday. I was sitting in my office and one of our staff had answered the phone and came in and said, "There's a woman who wants you to call her back right away." So I recognized the name immediately because it was the woman who taught both of my kids 5th grade. So I called her back because I was like, why is she calling me? My kids are in college and high school. And she was sitting with a friend who was worried that folks might not be able to access birth control, including Plan B. And so this friend of hers had gone out and bought a bunch of Plan B and wondered what she should do with it. And I said, well, Planned Parenthood, of course, has plenty. And we spent a few minutes just brainstorming places in the community that she could bring it. So it would just be available for folks who happen to walk into that place or, needed it, right? So it was that moment, just that, like, folks are thinking about it. People are taking care of the absolute strangers, This woman was not like, should I give it to my friends? She was like, where should I bring it so that everyone can get it? Anyone who needs it can get it. So it's stuff like that every single day, I know that is happening in every single corner of our state. But having those conversations and hearing about that firsthand and just getting to witness it is every single day things like that happen. And that is what keeps me going, is knowing that folks really do care about this and they care about each other. Yeah.
That's really lovely. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for really being models in your own work, in your own lives, for what that care looks like for people around you, for the workforce that's providing healthcare to Montana's communities, to your own communities. I am so grateful for your insights, for the care that you provide, for the very complicated work that you do. And it's just good to know that we have such fantastic leaders doing that work in the state, and it makes International Women's Day truly something that we can celebrate as we think about accelerating action, even if what that looks like is slowing down and paying attention to the smaller things and how we build trust and care for each other.
Thank you for listening to Impact Under the Big Sky, Stories of Philanthropy in Montana, a podcast from the Montana Community Foundation. This has been a Social Flicks podcast studio production, and our podcast was written and produced by Rebecca Connors. A video version of this podcast is available on MCF's YouTube channel and on our website at mtcf.org. Stay connected with MCF by following @Montana Community Foundation on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Special thanks to our listeners and supporters for helping us share the stories that impact our community. Join us next time as we continue to explore the heart of philanthropy in Montana.